Monika, even as a child, you were able to perceive the spirits. When did that start, and how did you learn to deal with this? Yes, it was in my childhood that I began to have experiences with people who had left the earth and were just simply appearing to me. For me, this was something quite normal, and for this reason, it was not clear to me why people didn't understand me. And when I then tried to talk about it or told the others that there was yet another person present, I often heard, "Monika sees ghosts," or "she's a dreamer." Dealing with that wasn't easy for me because it was all just marked by a lot of fear. The fear of not being understood, considering the fact that these things were actually normal for me, and yet no one could understand me at the time. And that's something that often made me very sad. I still remember that back then in my early childhood, I used to look behind the door or underneath the bed, above all in the evening before falling asleep, because I wanted to be sure that no one was there. And at that very moment, nobody was around. But as soon as the light was switched off, I often saw someone standing there, and this was not so easy for me to understand at the time. But because of these experiences, I have now gotten to the point where I am now, that is, where the invisible has now become visible, so to speak. Have you ever seen anything more than deceased spirits? Yes, animals then joined in. I often went for walks in the woods together with my grandfather, and all the animals and fairies. They have always been with me, actually, and it was very clear to me that they also belonged. But to understand that all these things were visible only to me was not very easy. And the animals were playing with each other, just as if they were together as usual, and as they did in times when they were alive. And the deceased people as well, they were showing themselves as they used to live, often wearing the same clothes as during their life on earth, and so on. Also, the hair was styled in the same way. Well, a lot of all this became visible to me. Tell me, what kind of animals did you see? Well, it was mainly pets that appeared. You mean the deceased pets? Yes, that's right. And what were they doing? They were playing quite normally with each other. Often I saw a picture that was shown to me, thereby realizing that animals as well can transmit messages to people. And it was fascinating for me, indeed, perceive what animals are able to pass on to us humans. The animals don't want us to be sad either. We who are still on the earthly plane, they too want to support us. They also show us that they will be connected with us further on. When you say that animals convey their messages to us, how should we envision this? It's actually the same as with humans, because it depends on the animal's energy field inherent to them that has something to do with it. And that's how I get information. It can be in the form of images that are shown to us from the spiritual sphere. It can be feelings. You said that you have seen fairies. Oh yes, that's quite true. And how did you see those fairies? Or what did they look like? Oh, it was so beautiful. We were in the forest, walking there, and every now and then there were fairies here or there, like you know them from the movies. They were all around us, and they were so full of joy, and such a joyful feeling was emanating from them, a feeling just simply of nature and shelteredness, and this was also very nice to see. Are there things that you remember particularly well from your childhood as to these perceptions? Well, childhood is rather associated with fear and doubt, but now I know for sure it belongs to me, and of course, I can look at it differently now, and I am thankful for all these experiences that I was allowed to have. I had a very exceptional experience when I was in my teens, and when I was once again on the road with the car. There was a period of 7 years when I didn't see the light beings, so no deceased animals either. And during this time, I was free from this kind of experience, so to speak. It was very liberating for me, as at that time I was working in a nursing home. And during this time, I was made aware of death in a different way. And this was really quite impressive. And then, after these 7 years, let me add here that I was also in a relationship at the time that then broke up. And just in the first moment when I was driving the car, I saw on the back seat a gentleman from the spiritual sphere who had just taken his seat there. This was a very exceptional experience. And with it, everything was back again after 7 years. When I looked in the rear view mirror and saw someone sitting in the back of the car, my first thought was, oh no, not again. And that's what the gentleman wanted. And then he probably wanted just to drive along with you. Yes, he wanted to drive along with me, and from that day on, the spiritual world has been accompanying me again every day, always and everywhere. So when you say that you didn't see any spiritual beings for 7 years, how old were you during that time? So between the ages of 15 to 21, 22. Monika, you had a near-death experience on the birth of your first child. Yes, the pregnancy was fantastic. No complications, whatever. Everything was wonderful. So as the due date approached, I did get a bit nervous, which of course is quite normal. Then one day, when the due date had already passed, I started having back pain, and that back pain was unbearable. We called the hospital, and I was told to take a bath, which I did, but the pain did not lessen. On the contrary, my whole body contracted. I had also lost a lot of blood, whereupon I was then finally taken to the hospital. As is usual, several examinations were carried out, and suddenly the midwife got into a slight panic. Somewhere or somehow, I felt that something was not quite normal, but rather that something was different now. And we were also told that the baby's heart rate had slowed down noticeably. So an emergency C-section was mandatory, and this then speeded everything up. And I felt the pain that was so much related to the body. It was everywhere. The pain wasn't just in the abdominal area, but all over my back, so that I could hardly move because of the pain. But at first, they didn't believe me. I was told that I had already received medication, and so on, and yet I felt everything. I was then administered something else, whereupon I felt as if I was floating. I most certainly must have fallen asleep, and I became very quiet and relaxed. And all at once I saw a light coming toward me, and with this light came this abundance, this shelteredness, also familiarity. It was simply beautiful. And I followed this light, and I moved on as if I was floating. Everything was there, and yet nothing. It was just all beautiful. It's rather difficult to put this feeling into words, but I'm experiencing it again, just now as I tell you all this. It's enormous, this light, also this warmth. And so I was moving on, or better, it just pulled me on without me thinking about it in any way. And I felt that actually thoughts are merely present here on the earthly plane. But in the spiritual spheres, you are just free. And so I just let myself float. Every now and then, I was looking down into the birthing or operating room, realizing the hustle and bustle that was going on there, now as before. I also saw how my husband had to leave the operating room. Somehow, I had one thought or another. Then again, I was thinking of nothing at all. I couldn't understand what was going on down there. I just felt enshrouded in this intense light that I absolutely wanted to keep because it just felt wonderful. But all at once I heard a voice saying, "Monika, you have to go back. You still have a task." I don't remember what I was thinking then, but somehow I thought, no, I'm here now, finding myself enshrouded in this unconditional love, in this freedom. I'm staying here. Then I heard the voice saying this to me once again. And at the same time, I immediately heard a child crying. And I thought to myself, there is a child crying. And through the child's crying, I felt that this intimacy, this light, was vanishing, gradually and slowly. It felt like a feather gradually floating downwards, swaying in the rhythm of the air. And that way, I came back down to earth. And the closer I got, the more I became aware of my body. And I felt the pain again. And that was not very pleasant. It felt right to me to stay there, at this living spring, but that was not possible. Whereas in the meantime, I'm very grateful to my daughter, because her crying gave me the task once again. And I'm happy about that, and grateful to my daughter for being here again, even though this experience was fantastically beautiful. What was this voice like that told you all this? It was a male voice that I didn't know. I didn't see anyone either. It was just this neutral voice that was there. And since then, this voice accompanies me, even when I'm working or at the spiritual encounter evenings, where most of the messages are spoken in dialect, whereupon this voice is to be heard speaking High German or in written language. It then speaks as if through me, and it's this familiarity that is always very present. What impact did this near-death experience have on your future life? This experience has had a very strong impact on my life, in a way that I would like to open myself even more to the light beings, that is, to these deceased people and animals, because I know that this experience was given to me like a second life, and that's why I want to share it with others. I want to give people the feeling that they don't have to be afraid of death, because we all are living on after death. We will only leave the earthly body, thereupon just only moving on to another sphere. And so I opened my spiritual practice to pass on exactly this knowledge to people and to show them that they don't have to be afraid. When counseling people, what are the problems that most people, mostly or often, are confronting you with? The conversations actually often deal with situations that could not be solved here on earth. This can be a situation that has to do with forgiveness, when death has separated people from each other and a conflict remains unsolved, or much too early. I often hear that when a young person has crossed over into the spiritual world, that it was too early, and so on. Although from my point of view, there's no such thing as too early. For if the soul is okay with going, then it goes. Age doesn't matter here, because we come from the light, and we will be going into the light. And there is no such thing as too early, nor is there any such thing as too late. But understanding that, particularly when a young person passes on, is often nevertheless difficult. So we must trust in the particular situation and in the fact that every dying or death is part of life. Just like birth, we are coming from the light and we will be returning into the light. When you say that we come from the light and we return into the light, do you believe in reincarnation? Yes, absolutely, I believe it. Monika, thank you so very much for your interview. Thank you also